Good morning. This morning I'd like to give you some guidelines to how to go about writing the extended abstract. And there are many things I could have chosen to talk to you about, but in my experience with teaching undergraduates writing courses, one of the main hurdles I've found for most students is the way in which they go about writing that the abstract or a essay. And so today I'd like to try and present to you a way that I've found to be very helpful and one that can potentially be one that is rewarding for you. So I'd like to work on the theme of writing equals thinking, rather than writing is just an exercise that you have to do to get a mark. It is also a process that can help you to think and better understand your topic. Okay. So this is a graph I picked up from the internet, and this shows the typical process that a student goes through when they're writing a paper. So initially here at the start, they have to try and find their title. So they have to find the title, and then they become quite depressed. This is the enjoyment level here on the axis there, and this is the timeline. But then when they find the title, then it becomes very enjoyable to do the research. And there are different things here. Then they actually have to start doing the writing. Normally when they start to do the writing, suddenly it becomes very depressive, very painful to start to try and write. And later on I'll explain why that reason is. And then they open the computer, and look at the screen, and first they write the first sentence. And then there's a level of enjoyment. Then suddenly they can't remember what to write next. And so there's a big decrease here in enjoyment level, increase in pain or stress. And that is a typical process of a student when he's trying to write the paper. And normally here, at this time here, you start to think of, oh, I better go off to the library, or I better go look at the internet, and you start to waste your time doing something else because you're so frightened of continuing the writing process. So hopefully today I'd like to convince you to go about it in a way that you don't get hit that wall. Okay. So normally a writing is broken up into three phases. First is the preparation stage, where you do the research, gather the information, organize it, and get it ready for you to write. Then the second stage is what I call the first draft. In this stage, you're not trying to aim to write a perfect essay or a perfect abstract. What you're trying to do is just get your ideas on paper as quickly as possible. And then in the third stage, you then go ahead and try to revise that material that you have written down. So I'll explain each of these in more detail. But before I do that, the image I have is when somebody goes to going to build a house, they don't just grab some nails and wood and start to hammer. First, they go around and look at all the different types of houses that they may like to look at. Then they decide what style of house they want. They then go back and look at those styles of houses and gather information and draw out some plans. And so the whole planning process for building the house is quite long. And then once you've got all these plans and done all that, this is what I call the preparation stage. Then the next stage is to put up the frame. If you just grab a sink or grab the toilet and just throw it into the house without any order, then it is very difficult to get a nice house at the end. You first have to develop a frame. And this is what I call the first draft. You're trying to develop a frame that you can hang your ideas on. And then finally, at the very end is where you get the abstracts coming out. Okay. So in terms of preparation, if it was a scientific paper, normally it would be about 70% of the time is in preparing for writing the paper. And about 10% of the time is writing the draft. And another 20% is writing the revision. But because you have already done quite a lot of work for your presentation, I have reduced the time for preparation. But I would like to emphasize that the more time you spend in preparing for writing the essay, then the less time and the less stress that you'll take in writing that first draft. And then finally the output will be much better. Okay. So in the first stage, like I showed you in looking at the houses, when you're dry a house, you have chosen a theme, and there have been many people who have also looked at that theme and who have written about that theme. And so rather than trying to come up with something original about that theme, I would first look at how have other people tackled that subject? How have other people described that automation? What areas did they focus on? And so in my first attempt to start to gather information, what I first do is try and gather as much information in a shorter amount of time as possible. So I normally would go to a reference database or to the internet and look for some major articles on that particular theme and gather that information as quickly as possible. I won't be trying to read all the details of the information. At this stage, I'm just trying to look at how do other people attempt to describe the area I'm going to write about. What are the major themes? And then once I get that information, I can then start to refine my search to get to specific points that I want to get out. So the stages I've got here is collect the information, evaluate the content, group the content, and organize the content. So first of all, when I start to look at collecting the information, I look, as I said, starting from a broad theme. I'm not trying to get very fine details. I'm just trying to get how do other people look at that area. And then as I go, I'm collecting information and sources. It is very helpful if when you're doing that, you also at the same time create a database where you can readily access that information at a future date. So there are a number of reference databases on the that are sold commercially, as well as this one is a particularly open source one that I found very useful. And as I do this, if I can at all possible, I collect PDF files or Word files of the articles that I have collected. And I rename those PDF files or file names with a title that I can readily find. So normally I would have the author, the year, and the title of the article. And the reason that I use PDF or Word file is that if you try to download a HTML file or other files, often the name cannot be changed or the link will be lost. So I first of all, when I look at a web page, for instance, I will use a save function that saves it as the PDF rather than as a HTML, because it then helps me to organize the information later on. So this is an example of when I was researching this particular presentation. Here I've gone through and I've collected a number of articles on the theme that I was trying to talk about. I've renamed them so that I can quickly find where they are in one particular file. And as you can see, most of them are PDF files. Next, after having collected, normally it would take me about an hour or 2 hours to collect all those articles, because I have not attempted to read them. Now that I have an idea of the overall framework for that particular theme, I then go back and start to read each of those articles individually. And as I read them, I also open up a Word file. And in that Word file, I will copy and paste ideas I think I can use in my article into the Word file. And at this stage, I am not having any order. I just throwing it in there. But I also make sure that I have the reference there I can go back to if I need to quote it. So at this stage, I'm just collecting ideas, and in the back of my mind, I am trying to start to organize the information in a way that I want to be able to present to other people. So next is, once I've gone through and collected all those ideas, I then start to try and evaluate and group those ideas. So normally in a scientific paper, there's a very common format called IMRAD: Introduction, Method, Results, and Discussion. I first set out in my Word file those 4 categories. Then I start to cut the ideas that I have pasted into that file into the individual categories. And once having done that, I then start to group the ideas. So I'm trying to create, like that wooden frame of the house, what are some of the common ideas or themes that are coming out of that. And so rather than doing it in my head, I'm actually doing it on a Word file. And as I go through it, I also start to look at questions like why did they do it, what problem are they solving, and place the automation in its context. In the methods, how does the automation work? And in the results and discussion, what can it do, how does it work, and the take-home message. So this is an example that I come up with after I had grouped all my ideas into the individual sections. I titled my essay Writing Process, and then what I think about the writing process was one thing, and there was the common approach, and the approach about getting experiments under the belt. And then there's the alternative approach of breaking it up into 3 stages. So by that process of putting all the ideas in there and then grouping them into their individual common themes, this structure started to come out automatically rather than I having to sit down and sweat blood and tears trying to come up with that structure. So once you've got those ideas in, next is you want to create an outline of the main subjects of each paragraph, or even just for the introduction and methods and results and discussion. And what you're trying to do in the objective outline is to sequence the material and to develop a focus. What's very important here is that there's a very important difference between a report and an abstract or a particle, a paper. In a report, you're just telling what somebody else has done. And so it can be just, they did A, they did B, and they did C. That doesn't have any of your original thinking and organization involved. In writing an extended abstract, you're trying to provide how you have understood the subject and how you want to inform the audience about that subject. So rather than just picking out all the information that you can find, you need to start to think about what information do I want to use, and what information, more importantly, what information is not so important to the subject or focus that I want to write about. So this is the example of an outline from a paper that was published about the earthquake in Kobe. And so here, the problem is the description of the quake. They were trying to look at prediction model. And then in their results here, the first they're going to talk about the flow rate before the quake and after the quake. And then some of the content of the radon content in the underground flow before the quake and after the quake. And then they do the analysis. By not even having read the paper, you can still see the structure that they have set up when they're going to write the paper in terms of before the quake, after the quake in terms of the flow rate, then the radon content before and after the quake, and then they do their analyses here. So there's a logical structure there that they set up before they have written the paper to help them to put the information in order. So once having gotten all that information together and you've got your outline, the next part is to go and write a first draft. I can't emphasize enough that in this first draft, you're not trying to write the perfect sentence. You're not trying to write the perfect essay. Expect to revise what you have written at least 3 or 4 times. So in this first draft, you're trying to just write as quickly as possible. More importantly is getting the ideas on paper rather than being it very pretty sentences or very complex sentences. So don't be a perfectionist. A draft is something that is very rough, that has very little grammar. And it's more important is to sketch out your ideas. And the focus at this stage is, again, putting your ideas into a logical organization so that later on you can come back and delete information that is not necessary for your argument, put it in another place where it is possible to, where it is necessary, and then finally to look at the grammar and other sentence structures. What also I mentioned is there is no need to start at the introduction, write the methods, and go through to results and discussions. Most people will start at the methods. The methods is the easiest section because it's very routine. And so in your case, for the extended abstract, it would be writing how the automation works. That requires less thinking and evaluation on your part. It is more a direct communication of how that information, how that automation works. So once having quickly written that first draft, you come back to do the revision. And again, the revision can also be divided into 3 stages. And the first stage is, again, to come back and look at the structure of your essay. Because if you've spent a lot of time writing sentences that you think are very good sentences, then you are very unlikely to want to cut or to throw away. So before you start to proofread and make the sentence very easy to read, first of all, you need to look at the big picture of how the information is organized, whether that information is relevant for your focus. And if it's not, then to cut it out. And then once you've gotten your strong logical structure, then proceed to the next stage of editing. And in the final stage is the proofreading, where you're looking more at grammatical mistakes, tense, and that sort of thing. In helping you to do that revision of the big picture, a common method to use is called reverse outlining. So at the start, when you're planning it, you try to write an outline, but as you have written the paper, often that initial outline has changed. So in this process, you want to look at what is the main theme of the paragraph. Are all the sentences in that paragraph related to that main theme? So again, you're still not getting down to the or the English grammar points, but you're more looking at now at the structure of the paragraphs and whether the ideas in those paragraphs are relevant to what you want to say. Normally when you're doing this reverse outline, you're looking at each individual paragraph. And if at all possible, a paragraph should only contain 1 or 2 main ideas. If it has many ideas in there, it then becomes just like a basket where you've thrown in all different things with there's no organization there. So you want to try and focus each paragraph onto a main theme and make sure that the sentences within that paragraph are addressing that main theme. Also, from the start of a paragraph, normally you are trying to set out what is the topic of this paragraph, either in the first sentence or in the first 1 or 2 sentences. And then you address that main topic, and then finally you come to hopefully a conclusion at the end of that paragraph that will lead on to the next paragraph. So, again, here at this stage, it is as important to throw away. Clutter means something that is not necessary, that is making it difficult for the reader to understand your logic, your flow of information. So concentrate on the logic and also concentrate on that material, of removing that material that is not helping the paragraph achieve its aims. Finally, when you come to revision or proofreading, a good way to do proofreading is, first of all, to read your sentence out aloud. If you read it in your mind often will connect the dots. It understands what you're trying to say. But if you read it out aloud, it disassociates it from your logical thing, and you can feel this is not right. And so that helps you to look at more grammatical aspects. Second is, if at all possible, write in the active voice, not in the passive voice. Has been done. It's much more difficult to follow. The one exception is probably the method section. The method section is often written in the passive voice. Next, when you are writing the sentences, if you have lots of is or to be or are's in there, then it becomes very dull and not so interesting to read. So try and use verbs, very active verbs, rather than creating using very common is, are verbs. Check for consistency, check for references, and if at all possible, get a friend or somebody else to read your paper and get them to help you to look at the paper from fresh eyes, because the peer review process is a very important part of the whole scientific process. And when you are submitting a paper, the most highly regarded papers are the papers that are peer reviewed. And so you need also to become familiar with that process and to be able to both provide peer review for other students, as well as being able to receive that to improve the way in which your paper is written, your logic is developed. And so I would encourage you to, if at all possible, to get somebody else to read it. Okay, that's the